It is 32 degrees and snowing. Hi, sweetheart. This will be Miss Kona's first off-the-property experience. I'll be taking her to the Southern Equine Expo for the Smoky Mountain Trail Challenge, and I'll be competing with her in the level 1 in hand. And I will also be taking my personal mare, Raven, for level 2 in hand and level 2 undersaddle.
Will it make her better or more psycho? You're already friendly to us. She's like, save me. Save me.
Miss Kona! Sorry. Oh, you're fine. On Thursday night, I was able to get Kona into the arena to play on the obstacles, and she handled it all very well. Her biggest thing was the people outside of the arena and the speakers that were outside of the arena. They were making static noises that she wasn't overly fond of, but she handled the obstacles so well. She didn't really look at any of them. This was her first time seeing a teeter-totter, and she didn't mind it at all. Even when it moved, she didn't freak out. She just remained calm and walked over, and then she walked right back over a second time, and I was really happy with her. This next obstacle that I took her over was a balance beam, and this balance beam in particular was quite scary. My personal mare didn't like it at all. It was very squeaky, and one of the boards actually moved slightly when they stepped on it, but Kona handled it really well, and she didn't seem to really mind that it was squeaking or that it moved at all. This little jump here, she didn't mind that at all. She didn't spook at it even once. The water, she was a little afraid of to start with, but she walked through it and didn't have any major issues.
1, 2, 3, 4. Check 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, head. Hey, 1, 2, 3, 4. See something?
The next obstacle that we did was backing through a chute. It is a more complicated chute with a little bit of a zigzag, and then it's just a U. Considering Kona had never backed through a chute before, I was super happy with how she did, especially since there was a speaker that was behind the chute that she had to back towards. She did step on the block a little bit, but it was a pretty tight chute, and again, she's never backed through a chute before, and she backed pretty soft and was listening for the most part, so I was really happy with how she was doing this.
Hi, sweetheart. Kona!
So this is Kona's first go-round in the Smoky Mountain Trail Challenge. Our first obstacle was the large ladder, which I hadn't actually walked her through the night before, but she did walk through the smaller side and didn't mind the larger side at all. Then we had to walk over the little pedestal and around to the outside of the pinwheel and walk over the poles. Our only issue here was she did hit a few of the poles, but that's nothing too major. For the box bridge, we had to walk up and do a 90 and walk off, which she did pretty well with. Our next obstacle after the box bridge was the balance beam. I was really happy that she just walked right on. She does fall off right here, but I wasn't too concerned with that. She wasn't jumping off, she just fell. I was really happy with how she had handled the teeter-totter, with stepping down onto it for it to come down before proceeding to walk over it really quietly. With this next obstacle, we were supposed to back into the circle and then just walk straight out. However, since the judge had been sitting right behind the circle with a blanket and everything, he was very scary looking, and Kona was not convinced she wanted to have to back towards him. So, even though we did break pattern, I decided to just walk her in because I wanted her to realize that she could go near the judge without him eating her. We did get a 0 on this because we did break pattern, but I just wanted her to know she could go in there. Our last obstacle in the pattern was just walking over a simple bridge, which Kona didn't care about whatsoever. I was super happy with this pattern from her. Considering it was her first time off the property and first time really seeing any obstacles, she handled herself super, super well. So this is Raven's first go-round in level 2 in hand. Our first obstacle was to back through a chute, and Raven has never been a fan of putting her butt where she cannot see, and since we were not able to walk through the chute first, she did give a little bit of a fuss, but I was able to straighten her out the second time, and she did go in, and I believe we ended up scoring fairly decent on it. From the back, we then had to walk through the small side of the ladder, and Raven was a little bit nervous, so we didn't do the first half of the ladder correctly. Raven has always been a nervous horse when it comes to trail obstacles, so this is a little bit out of her comfort zone, but she did do the second half really well, and I was happy with her. From the ladder, we then had to walk through a water box, which you can't really see the greatest from this angle, but it was very muddy looking, and it is quite scary. The horses cannot tell how deep it actually is. Raven did walk through it on our practice Thursday night, To make the water a little less scary for her, I decided to take her through the short side, which is technically off pattern, but she still did walk through the water that way. From the water, we had to pick up a trot, which she did nicely, and then break to a walk to walk over the box bridge. From the box bridge, we then had to walk over the balance beam, and on Thursday night, Raven had not been a fan of the balance beam whatsoever. It was very, very scary to her with the squeaking and the slight moving. But in our class, she walked over it really nicely and actually scored a 9 out of a 10 on the scoring system. We then had to do a little bit of a zigzag to make it over these large logs, which she did really nicely. And then we had to do another bit of a zigzag and walk over the teeter-totter. We could have been a little bit straighter approaching the teeter-totter, but she didn't have any issues walking over it. From the teeter-totter, we had to walk to the inside of the pinwheel, and she had to walk around, which she did this really well. She picked up her feet and was careful not to touch any of the poles. And then we had to walk out and around over to the bridge and walk over the bridge to end the pattern. I was extremely happy with this pattern from Raven. This is Raven's first go around in the level 2 undersaddle trail class. Our first obstacle was the water crossing, and she did hesitate, but she did walk through, and I was so happy that she walked through it. We then had to pick up a trot and trot up the hill, break to a walk, and then walk back down the hill, and she didn't have any issues with this whatsoever. We then walked around and had to walk through the small ladder like we had in the in-hand. Unlike in the in-hand class, Raven didn't spook at the ladder this time. She actually did it pretty well. She does skip one right there, but other than that, she walked through it really well, and I was really happy with her. We then picked up a jog and jogged to the pinwheel where we were supposed to break to a walk and then walk over the pedestal. Raven does hesitate at walking over this pedestal, and she does back away from it. And then we go back up to it, and she sniffs it, and kind of hesitates a little bit, and then she does walk over it. We then had to trot around the outside of the pinwheel, and she does this really nicely. We then broke to a walk to walk over the logs, and she had no issues with these logs. Then we had to zigzag to be able to walk over the balance beam. She does well with the balance beam, however she does kind of launch herself at the end there. From the balance beam, we walked to the gate, and she had no issues whatsoever with the gate. She worked it really well. I was really happy with her for how she did with this. From the gate, we then had to walk onto the box bridge, and on top of the box bridge, we had to turn 360 degrees. It's kind of small space to make your horse do a 360, but Raven was able to stay on top of the box. We then had to walk over the teeter-totter, and she kind of hesitated a little bit with the teeter-totter, but she did walk over it fairly quietly, and I was happy with how she did there. Our final obstacle was backing it into the hay circle, and as I had said with our in-hand, Raven is not one to like to put her butt where she cannot see, and since we weren't able to walk forward before backing through the hay bales, she doesn't always trust that I will line her up properly. She did start to get a little bit frustrated, and she was tossing her head, and she really didn't want to have to back into the space, but she did do it, and it wasn't perfect, but I was really happy with her that she did back through the hay bales for me. Once in the circle, we had to do a 360, which she did really nicely, and then we had to trot directly out, and again, she did it really nicely.